it's nice being able to record there more. Yeah. So. Ooh, we're up to 8 people. Zoom in.
Should we put this in presentation mode or no?
I'm gonna wait because as soon as you click on it,
Oh, it starts.
she starts talking.
Oh.
So I think she's gonna have to talk first.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
I mean, we can give, I mean, Janelle should
Let's see, rearrange the slide.
or start on 2 or something and go back to
Well,
one.
you'd have to drag it up.
It's okay. You're gonna give us a little intro. Yeah, and then I'm thinking before we actually start the presentation. Well, I guess we have welcome. I'm not worried about it. It's gonna be perfect. Well, and I feel like when you're presenting to educators, they get it.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Agree. Should not be a tough crowd.
No.
You say, how you feeling? Go for it. Okay, we're ready. All right. Good afternoon to those of you who are here in person, and for those of you who are online, thank you so much for joining us for the session. We have Erin Johnson and Nicole Ball, both with us from the School of Social Work, and Kaylee Moreno-Burke is going to join us via pre-recorded videos throughout the presentation, so you can watch for her as well. And our session topic is addressing equity in Latinx retention and graduation through completion coaching. So thank you, Erin and Nicole. We'll let you get started.
All right. Okay, so before starting on our first slide, I think what we're going to do is do a little bit of an intro because Kaylee is pre-recorded. And so once we hit that slide, she'll start talking. So just to give a little bit of backstory about our presentation today. We originally put this presentation together with the intent of it being very lecture-y, I guess. And as we continue to work on it, we decided it needs to be more of like storytelling, because really what we're sharing today is a story about how we had a really cool idea and we got really excited about a really cool idea and we jumped right in, and some things went good and some things didn't. And the next semester we made some changes, and here we are in our second semester of this project, and we're already continuing to see things that we're going to be changing. And so what we're hoping to gain from today is not only to share our story, but to get input from those of you who are here today about what would you do? What would it look like if you were in this situation? And then what maybe insight can you give us as we continue to move forward and make changes in this project?
Hello, my name is Kaylee Moreno-Burke. I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of the Center for Latino Studies. I'm very excited to be here today, although virtually, with each of you to share about our new Latinx completion coaching program that we started this past fall in collaboration with the Social Work Department.
I'll just grab this so we have this.
Okay. Today, we're going to tell a little bit about our story, how this project came to fruition, why we selected these specific classes to partner with, how we approached the fall semester launch of the program, and then we'll talk a little bit about the changes that we made in response to some of the challenges that we experienced throughout the fall term in order to adjust programming. Today, I'm excited to be joined with my 2 collaborators and partners, and I'll let them introduce themselves next.
Okay. So I'm Nicole Ball. I've been with the Social Work Department for almost 9 years. And I think this is my 9th year of teaching as a level 3 adjunct. And my specialty is clinical social work. So primarily when I'm not teaching statistics, I'm teaching the advanced interviewing courses. And so for undergraduate, that is the courses where they're learning those more advanced interviewing skills, how to work with a client, how to do assessments on a client, and then follow a path from meeting the client for the first time all the way through the end. And so that's the work I've been doing at Ferris. And Erin, go ahead.
And my name is Erin Johnson, and I've been with the social work department for 4 years now. So much like Nicole, outside of this, I'm a clinical social worker. And I teach for the undergrad and then our graduate program as well.
Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to share a little bit of an overview about our collaboration. And again, we want this to be a little bit like storytelling.
It is no surprise to any of us that as an institution, we have been experiencing enrollment challenges over the past few years. In addition to enrollment challenges, many students who have entered college over the past 2 years have had an altered college experience, struggled with mental health, struggled with adjusting to in-person classes, and lack the same level of engagement that we saw prior to COVID-19. In response to these challenges and reviewing our institutional data around Latino retention and persistence, in August, this past fall, I approached the social work department about an opportunity to start a Latinx completion coaching program that would help us to expand the mission and the work of the Center for Latino Studies and address some of the barriers that our students are experiencing on our campus. This program would mirror the first-year peer success coaching program out of the Center for Student Involvement to help address the high attrition rates for Latino students at Ferris State in their second and third year, but also help to decrease the time to graduation for our students. Erin, Nicole, and I began meeting to discuss the implementation with the social work students in their sections of Social Work 330 and Social Work 530. To assist students in being prepared to serve this target client base, we scheduled a time for me to come to their classes and provide a training about the Hispanic Latino community, barriers Latino students face nationally as well as on our campus. And additionally, a second training was scheduled to teach students how to use Microsoft Teams and teach them about the reporting requirements so that we can track the student engagement impact. This was a rapid fire start to the fall semester and helping to implement this program into the student engagement experience as well as into the syllabi for both of these courses. If you haven't heard of the Center for Latino Studies before, you may be asking yourself, well, what is the CLS and how does its work fit into this project? For the past 9 years, the Center for Latino Studies has been uplifting its mission to increase Latinx completion rates by informing the holistic student experience, maximizing equitable educational outcomes and career readiness through advocacy, community partnership, and culturally responsive academic, career, and personal development. From our mission, you can easily draw the connections to this work of closing the graduation gap for our Latinx Bulldogs. In the past, our programs and services have largely focused on serving Latino students engaged in our Promesa programs. But to address the equity gaps in Latino retention and completion, we needed to expand this work to better serve the larger campus. Thus, this project, we sought to engage all undergraduate Latino Bulldogs enrolled on main campus, Kendall, and statewide campuses in their second year and above. As a graduate from the social work program here at Ferris and having an understanding of the program experiences and course outcomes, it was easy to draw the connections with this project as well as the social work program. Additionally, the Center for Latino Studies has been an internship site for over the past 6 years and has had a strong relationship with the department. Thus, the expanded program opportunity was a natural fit to approach the department for collaboration. The skills and expertise that we were seeking from coaches to help support our students easily fit into the skills that students are developing in Social Work 330 and Social Work 530. Additionally, this helped the program to address different diversity, access, and better training our social work students to be prepared to serve diverse populations through intentional relationship development. We were really excited to continue to talk about the evolution of the project throughout the semester, as well as talk about the outcomes that we've already been able to see.
So that gives you a little bit of a picture of the why. We were looking at retention rates, we were looking at the specific needs of our Latinx students here on campus. And when Kaylee says it was rapid fire, it's no joke. Like we literally this summer, we're like, ooh, we've got a little idea here. And and this was the beginning of August, and the semester was starting 3 weeks later. And so we really had to work very quickly to identify not only logistically how this would work, a collaboration, but also how would it meet the needs of both the students at CLS and meet the needs of the work that we do in our social work classes, both undergrad and graduate. And so rapid fire is a perfect term for that, because we really had to come up with the planning very quickly. In terms of the courses that we chose to collaborate with, again, like Kaylee said, it was a fairly good fit, simply because we already had a relationship with CLS because of the amount of social work interns that we placed with Kaylee over at CLS. So that dynamic was already there. She knew the skills that our students were coming in with, and she had a fairly good idea of the skills that our students were learning in both of these classes. So I'll talk a little bit about Social Work 330, and then Erin will talk about 530. So Social Work 330 is called Social Work Interviewing 2. It's the second course that our undergraduate social work students are taking that surrounds what we call the plan change model, which we'll talk about in a moment. And essentially what that is how do you work with a client, regardless of the population they come from, regardless of their need, from the time they walk in the door and you identify their presenting problem, all the way until they've met their goals, you've assessed their needs, and off they go through the termination process. And so in this course, not only are we teaching students how to follow that path to helping their clients, but we're also teaching them the specific interviewing skills, how to talk to your client, how to engage with your client, how to assess your client's needs. And so therefore, we felt like this would be a really good fit with CLS, because essentially our students need to practice this. And traditionally, we had practiced this with service learning projects in the local Big Rapid school systems. We had done it at local nursing homes. And then at our Traverse City campus, we were partnering with local domestic violence shelters and local homeless shelters as well, where our students would get paired with somebody from one of these agencies, and they would get the opportunity to practice their interviewing skills, documentation skills, and following through with that plan change. And so we said, with COVID, we can't be sending our students out the way that we used to. So that service learning wasn't an option. How do we do this on campus? How do we do this in the classroom in a way that's going to be beneficial to our students? And then with this project also beneficial to the larger Ferris State campus. So that's what we're looking for in 330.
So Social Work 530 is actually a foundational course for students who don't necessarily come in with a social work background. So they might come in having graduated with a psych degree, criminal justice, business, right? So they don't have necessarily those foundational skills for interviewing clients. So Social Work 530 teaches the plan change process as well. And then it goes into learning some of those theories, models, perspectives that really drive evidence-based practice in social work in the clinical setting. And it is a master's level course. So while they teach similar things with plan change model and just key interviewing skills, I think it also takes into consideration those evidence-based practices like cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that. For our students who are going into more of a clinical mental health type setting.
So you can see why these were good fits to both meet the needs of CLS and meet the needs of our students to practice these skills and the documentation that goes along with it.
So just as a breakdown of what the expectation was from our end for our students in 330 and 530. Students were tasked with being a Center for Latinx Studies completion coach. They were to conduct outreach with CLS students. So get them aware of the program, what they have to offer. They were to provide the additional support for our Ferris community. And then one student from CLS would then become the client for what we called the client experience assignment. All right, so from our end, we needed to have a way to gauge the acquisition of skills and then the improvement of skills along the way, right? So we had this client experience. So essentially what it was working with a CLS student to go through the entire plan change model from those preparatory skills, which include intake paperwork, gathering that information about your client, to the beginning skills, discussing introductions, discussing ethical standards, things like that. Through exploring whatever the presenting issue is that the client brings in, through assessing what's going on, so it can drive treatment planning or contracting and goal setting. through working and evaluating. So what we do session to session with clients to help rectify, I guess, the reason, whatever that brought them in, whatever that presenting issue was, and then through termination and ending with the client.
And I think it's important to note too that, you know, these students are not well equipped to be doing therapy, right, at this stage. So when we say that they're assessing, you know, doing a treatment plan, it's for the presenting problem of these students for issues that might be, you know, how do I get a hold of my advisor? I don't know what classes to take next semester. I'm really confused about, you know, financial aid. I really don't know who to reach out to. One student was in, you know, they really didn't know much Spanish and they really wanted to connect with their culture a little bit more and figure out how can they learn Spanish without having to sign up to take a Spanish course. Maybe it was, I'm struggling with my roommate and I really need to look for new housing because it's just not working anymore. So, I mean, we were seeing a multitude of different problems, but I think it's fair to say that if there was a clinical need, we were making the appropriate referrals.
Yes. And we will get into that as one of the issues that did, you know, come up.
So now we're going to talk about implementing. So we had these great ideas. How are we putting this into practice? So I'm going to talk about social work 330. So again, this is the undergraduate course. Most of these students are juniors. This is one of the last classes they take to practice those skills before they go into their final internship. So our students are doing a 2-semester long internship right before they graduate. And so often these students are juniors and they're getting ready to enter the field. So our goal for these students is to, number one, engage in that interviewing practice. Practice asking open-ended questions. Practice reflecting back emotion to our client. Practice assessing what the client's needs are, as well as practice that documentation. In the classroom, we're working on how do you write a progress note? How do you do a full biopsychosocial assessment? How do you create a treatment plan? But the plan here was for them to actually use it in practice with an actual client, much like they were doing when we were doing more service learning out in the community. And the progress here was towards that ongoing engagement. So they had a requirement to meet a minimum of 8 times throughout the semester with the person that was identified to be their client and work through that completion coaching process, again, by assessing the needs, making appropriate referrals, and then following through on providing those needs. So during that intake process, getting to know them, I don't think we need to go over it again, but much like what we talked about earlier, going through that plan change process throughout those 8 sessions.
Yes, there is a note in the chat. I don't know if you want to take a look at it, see if there's a related question.
Sure.
It says that they love the cross-discipline collaboration.
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah. And that was our goal too. Like, how can we serve the Ferris community? How can we serve our bulldogs, you know, while also meeting the objectives in the classroom? So let's see, what do we have here? Oh, we're going to go back. So now we're going to talk about turbulence. So we've gotten takeoff, that fast, rapid takeoff, and here's our first set of turbulence, because it's you know, it was certainly rapid fire. So number one, we started a little bit late. Ideally, with a project like this, you would want to start in the beginning of the semester right away. And because we were throwing this together fairly quickly, we got a late start with number one, Kaylee coming to our classrooms to do some diversity training. We did not want to throw these students in with a lack of understanding about the needs of our Latinx students, an understanding of culture. And so we had to really make sure that they were getting that. And we had a little bit of a late start with that. And then so therefore we got a late start assigning caseloads to these students so they could reach out. So that was one of our first bumps in the road. For my students in particular, there was a bit of a lack of confidence. There was a fear of, when I start reaching out to these students, well, what do I say? How do I do this? And even though we're practicing these skills in the classroom, it's very scary to reach out to your peers and not only not know what their needs are going to be, but not be quite sure how to assist in those needs. So even though in the classroom, we're consistently having dialogue about this, there was still a real confidence issue specifically with our undergraduate students. We also found that time management was a big part of the turbulence because our social work students were struggling with, you know, I sent that email and nobody emailed me back and I don't want to bug them. So I'm not going to reach out again. And so there is, again, part of that confidence, but also if we're not engaging and consistently reaching out, then those students feel forgotten, or those students, you know, thought it was just a spam email or a spam text that they were getting for that initial engagement. There was also some lack of responsiveness from the Latinx students, simply because they weren't quite sure what was going on. They had gotten an email at the beginning of the semester saying, this is what we're going to be doing. But as we know with many of our students, they get a lot of emails, right? So not only did they maybe miss the email saying, hey, this is what you can expect from engagement with a completion coach, but they were also maybe missing the emails or ignoring the emails that they were getting for that initial outreach saying, hey, this is who I am and this is why I'm here. So the responsiveness from those students was also very lacking. And then finally, there was a lack of accountability. There were points assigned in my classroom, in my syllabus for the documentation and engagement. So the progress notes associated with it, the treatment plans associated with it, but there wasn't any accountability for the outreach. So my students would come in and say, well, I reached out, but there was no accountability for how many times they reached out. And as we know with many of our students, if there's not a points assigned to it, especially our undergraduate students, they're not going to often be engaging in that. And so because there were no points attached with that engagement, we did find that that lack of accountability meant some lack in engagement. So that was the turbulence that we were experiencing. So our first question, our first outreach for feedback from everybody here today is, how would you have handled some of this turbulence in the classroom? And what might you have done to avoid that? Obviously, we've made plenty of changes this second round, which we'll get to. Anything noteworthy anybody would like to share?
Anybody online who would want to type anything in the chat box?
I mean, for the preparation of the Latinx students, there's just been a session where they were talking about face-to-face communication and texting being better methods. So maybe like actual meetings set up, face-to-face meetings, or multiple ways of communicating instead of just relying on emails, you know, that students are emailed so much, so that they're prepared to respond.
Right. And you know, we worked so hard on helping students with the confidence to send that first email too. We were so excited, and we would sit in class and we would draft this initial email and make sure everybody was feeling good about it before we sent it out. And that is one of our findings, is that students just get a bunch of emails, and so they're not reading through them. Anything else? Do we have a comment online?
There's a question about how many students are typically in these two courses in the semester.
I would say on average, for social work 330, I would say an average of 12, anywhere our cap is 15.
Same with
So
530.
yeah, I would say anywhere from 12 to 15, a lower number in our Traverse City campus. Last semester in Traverse City, I think we had, or this semester in Traverse City, we have 10.
But that is helpful feedback.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So the next set of turbulence for social work 330 was lack of opportunity for our students to practice the skills. So the whole goal for our students was to practice these interviewing skills in a real life setting. And therefore, because of the lack of accountability, the lack of engagement, we were really saying, oh man, our students aren't getting to practice these skills that we had intended them to practice. And therefore, they had the lack of an opportunity for robust documentation. They were providing documentation on, oh, a student said, please leave me alone, I don't want to engage. They had documentation from a student who maybe, needed help identifying some housing resources. But in terms of robust documentation practice, such as assessment, treatment, planning, we really did not get, our students didn't get that opportunity. And so we had to, therefore, at least in my course, I had to shift the classroom experience very much so. So typically in social work 330, we're doing labs consistently. We're practicing these skills in large groups, in small groups, in front of each other, in what we call a fishbowl. They're consistently practicing their interviewing skills. But I had to make that shift fairly quickly to say, ooh, they're not getting this experience that we thought. So therefore, maybe we need to add some more time in the classroom to get these skills, and maybe add a different assignment so that they're walking out of this class at the end of the semester having practiced that documentation appropriately.
Is there another comment? Sorry.
Yep, there's another comment. It says for response from them rather than a group email individual contact.
Yeah, and it was individual from their completion coach, but as it could have been less robotic, I think. Yeah.
Was there any form of introduction of the completion coaches to the Latinx students in a very like relaxed, like a reception sort of thing where there's nobody's got skin in the game kind of thing? It's
Yeah,
just
I like
meet-
that.
These are the people that you might be hearing from, putting faces with names.
Yeah.
Like if you lead off the semester with that, then you could end up having maybe
Yes.
more contact.
Yeah,
Like a-
absolutely.
like a-
It's not just
Great
some
kind of
random
thing.
person emailing me or
Yeah.
texting me. or-
And Kaylee did notify these students,
Right.
but a notification is just another email. It's
Right.
just another newsletter. It's just, and it was in the CLS newsletter that she announced it. But how many newsletters do we get and they're getting shifted off to the
Even
side?
maybe if it's just some sort of event. because-
And then there was a need on my end to be flexible with grades, right? Because students are not getting the experience we thought, students are not turning things in the way they did. So much like all of us, we've become very flexible with COVID and understanding of student needs and how those are changing. But in terms of, this experience, I had to be very flexible and forgiving and understanding from that. So again, any additional ideas on flexibility before we turn it over to Erin's experience?
I just want to mention, a lot of times because we're so siloed at Ferris, right, there's a lot of initiatives that are going on that are very similar. So the potential to maybe partner with the peer success coaching, because they're doing something so similar and they're running up against the same problem. Because my son is a peer success coach with Angie Roman.
Okay.
And so to maybe, collaborate that way, it's to like, oh, these are the issues that we run into, these are the issues, how do we get that feedback?
Right.
So.
And I know that Kaylee was looking at mirroring that, but specific to the Latinx community on campus, but that would be a great collaboration as well. Absolutely.
There's tools coming that could assist.
Yeah.
I hate to mention this every place I go, but it's coming, so might as well
Bring it.
mention it. Navigate is coming. And Navigate, it will have additional tools that the students might not have access to, but as the instructors, you could potentially text those groups.
Yes.
Unless there's a way to make them part of a care team or something like that, that's incorporated. I'm using verbiage for Navigate. I know that everybody's not familiar with. But just kind of thinking that because texting and tracking becomes much easier. So if we had something that students in the class could use similar to that, that could track them.
Yeah. And we're using Teams to track, but it doesn't have the same,
Right.
like
Yeah. And
accountability.
it's not as easy to
Right.
to navigate. It's not, or to document case notes, or
Right.
things like that.
There's another comment.
Sure.
If students try the approach, please help me with the class project by letting me help you.
That's a good one. I actually like that.
And one more note on flexibility too, is just like, we're always trying to tell students, like, even failure is what you learn from, right? So this happened this time, but what if it had happened differently? So that giving them those what if scenarios as a part of flexibility. and
Yeah.
giving, like, this is how it turned out, so you don't have this documentation, but in an ideal world, what would you have done if they had responded to you? Like, what are some potential responses?
Yeah.
Because then they're also ready if
Yep.
you get those kinds of responses.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Looks like there was one more turbulence for me. There was a lot. And then as the end of the semester is approaching, we found that we had a very lax plan on how to move into the next semester. So students were like, okay, I'm terminating. What should I be doing here? Are they going to have another completion coach next semester? Are we just sending them back to the Latina Center to, get support? Like, what is that plan? So that was another, what's going to happen next, not only for our students, but for the CLS students and for the collaboration overall. Okay, so Erin, you can talk about your
Okay.
experience.
Yes, so just as kind of a brief recap, 530 students were also tasked with being the CLS completion coaches. They were to then complete the entire client experience on one student from their caseload who was responsive from CLS. And then they would have to go through the entire intake process, document each session. They were supposed to do 8 45-minute sessions that would more mirror an actual like therapy setting. And the goals of the collaboration were the same for between 3:30 and 5:30. So again, right off the get-go, we struck some turbulence in 5:30 as well. The timing of the start, certainly we didn't get going with, I guess, having caseloads ready to go and our students making those initial contacts until probably week 5 or 6. So we were already into the semester. CLS students are already into the groove of what they're doing, right? We had difficulty while 5:30 students were extremely eager to send those emails they would utilize Google, the phone and send text messages. We didn't have the Latinx engagement and responsiveness that they were hoping for. So what that did was kind of create a divide in my class of the 5 students who had CLS, students who were really engaged and willing to go through this process. And then, you know, my other 11 students that were kind of scrambling for what do I do? How do I complete this kind of experience? I don't want to fail the course, right? I did not have issues with points or accountability or things like that. And I don't know if that comes with just maybe the level of maturity for master's students, and many of them come in with just a lot of life experience too. But they were very much engaged and very willing to continue to try. And then there was also some difficulty in just navigating, like I have this CLS caseload that you're telling me about. I'm working as a role at, you know, under CLS, but then I also have this client experience piece, and how do these connect? And so there was some reflection that had to be done on my part and how I would frame and present this to students in the following semesters. So any advice on how to increase, we talked about this a little bit with 3:30, but just increase awareness and engagement for CLS students.
Kind of off of the chat comment.
Yeah.
The one that was mentioned before, right, about, hey, can you help me help you?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe like a book, you know, a book voucher.
Yeah, oh,
sure.
To have
Give them some incentives.
Yeah.
If you will participate, your name will be in the drive for.
Students love free things.
Or
Yeah.
like guaranteed $5 Starbucks, and then like find some funding for from, you know, one of like RFS.
Yeah, well, I don't think the funding would be so
Like,
hard, but yeah.
between your department and RFS and CLS, maybe there can be a pool. But one thing I was thinking about with Welcome Week back week,
Yeah.
is I think some sort of event as a introduction is like a huge icebreaker to see. It's not as intimidating as it could be, or it could be perceived, because I think there is a stigma attached with the next community and mental health, right?
Absolutely.
And so social workers are seen as mental health, so you got to immediately mix that and say that's not what we're here for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're here for success at the school, not to.
And there were students who reached out and said, well, I don't want a counselor, you know?
Right.
And we had to address that stigma.
Right, but having that welcome back week, if that's something you choose to go with,
Yeah.
make sure it's communicated early.
Yeah. Okay.
Somebody said, social mixer may help as well.
Yeah.
Food is
good.
usually a draw.
Food is always.
Free food.
Free food.
Yeah, because Kaylee already does the family asada.
Yeah.
And so if your students were prepared by that time to go be a part of that, that's not only them, it's their family, which expresses that cultural.
That's neat.
I like that.
Yeah.
And then maybe if you get the family buy-in, you see that this person is here to support
Yeah.
their student volunteers, then that's a huge motivator, because they
Yeah.
will listen to their family.
Yeah. Good, thank you. This is great. Okay, so then this kind of speaks to what we started to get into a little bit earlier. But for 5:30 students, they have, out of the 5 CLS students that we've had engaging with social work students at the 5:30 level, they were getting into some ethical considerations that we hadn't really prepared for or thought about. And the first one was like, are we getting informed consent from the clients that we're working with, right, for the CLS students? And do the CLS students know that the information that they're giving us is going to be used for the purpose of an assignment, right? So we might have eyes on this that are beyond just the 530 or the 330 students, right? Because they're writing case notes, they're conducting assessments. And so that was an ethical consideration that we had to think about and make a quick adjustment on the fly to the intake paperwork so that our students were conveying to CLS students, please understand that this information could be used or will be used as a part, and that CLS individuals and social work department professors might be looking at it as well.
I think it's worth noting that we did have our students all sign confidentiality agreements.
Yep.
So that we
Oh,
did
yep.
have that piece, but it was the CLS informed consent piece that we had missed.
Yep.
There's
So-
another comment.
Yeah.
Says, I like the student volunteer idea from the Latinx community because that is something that they can add to their resumes or college experience.
Yeah, thank you. Good, so then the next little bit of turbulence that we hit in 530 was just recognizing the student role and responsibility. These are not practicing clinicians, right? They are not prepared to handle a lot of heavier material that sometimes would come up. They are well-equipped, very empathetic, but certainly intervention-wise, these are foundational students. They're not really sure what to do in certain cases. And so that became apparent. And something that we had to consider was, what is the role and responsibility of the 530 student? Where's that fine line where we have to go, oh, wait a minute, this isn't within the wheelhouse or the realm of what you need to be doing for the purpose of this course. And then when do we get the social work department involved? And then when do we get CLS involved to ensure that the CLS student has the resources and the supports that they need that are beyond the scope of what 530 students should take on? So,
Any other ethical considerations that you may have thought of?
yeah.
When your students were writing their reports or assessments, were they using an anonymous name or the same name?
We encourage them to, yes. So, I mean, we wouldn't be able to know for sure, obviously, when they're turning something in, but yes, we were encouraging them to use, a big name. But as Kaylee's tracking it, she can tell who's completed an intake or not, who's actually following through and engaging. Because we were tracking that in teams, who was engaging.
So, as you were talking about the issues went through, I was thinking of Title 9, the responsible employee. And so, are you having students who have, in essence, become a Ferris employee? And so maybe just like talking with legal to find out if that is the case.
Yeah.
And the case the mandatory.
Yeah,
Is in
right,
effect, and
right.
then that's a whole other training on their part.
You're right.
That they need to complete.
That is not what I had considered. Yeah. So again, right, you come in with this excitement and all these great intentions, but then as you get into it, it's like, oh, wait a minute, there's a lot more kind of to peel back here that we need to ensure that we're covering. So
Like, as far as the type of discussion you guys have with your students, did you prepare them with the possibility of the different types of discussions they can be having with your students?
Yeah.
And like, what could, well, I mean, I'm an academic advisor and I still get blindsided. when
Sure,
things
sure.
get run up. So
Sure.
like, I
So-
get you can't prepare for everything.
So when to pull us in,
Yes.
when to pull Kaylee in,
Yeah.
when there's a red flag,
Yeah.
when to make a referral, yep, that was all discussed.
Okay.
And kind of an ongoing thing that's kind of
Yeah.
integrated into the semester anyway, because we're practicing these skills during our class time and our lab time anyway. And so they're practicing them with each other, and then, we're, listening in. They're reporting back out via a case note to let us know what's going on during their practice time. So we're able to navigate those sorts of boundary issues as they come up. Yeah.
And students are getting instruction on, for example, like suicide assessments,
Mhm.
right? So when to, make
That's what
that
I'm
referral.
saying, like, when are they meeting? Or how are they meeting?
Yeah.
It's like, if it's outside of business hours, what's the process that they have? to
Yeah.
Sure.
Like, hey, if they are meeting with someone that starts to have suicide ideation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and I know that's all part of social work. So
Right, right.
you guys don't think about it, but I'm just thinking like, those supports
Absolutely.
are open on campus.
Yep.
Right.
Fine.
Right.
Right.
And there's the emergency line, but
But you're right, many of our students are meeting after class, after work, in the evening. Yeah, absolutely.
or do they have a point of contact where like, I just had this happen? Like,
Yeah.
is that where they reach directly out to you guys
Yes.
right after their meeting?
Yeah. Yeah, and two, you know, for 5:30, each week we would do supervision.
Yeah.
You know, so you would come in with your client, okay, so we process through what happened. And then
Debriefing.
debrief, yep. And then we'd also, you know, have them turn in their case notes as well. So we were able to kind of gauge how things were going too. Yep.
This is your last.
Okay, so then the last little bit of turbulence that we hit in 5:30 was the lack of responsiveness from the CLS caseload students really led, especially ongoing throughout the semester, really led to students feeling discouraged and frustrated. Like I said, and they probably had caseloads of
I think they had
10,
like 6 to 10.
Okay,
that first semester.
so 6 to 10 CLS students per social work student. And I only really had 5 or so that were engaged out of all of those students. So 5:30 students were just frustrated because they so wanted to provide support and utilize their skills. And so just dealing with that frustration and that disappointment in the classroom, particularly when we also had students then who were having a great experience, right, with this.
Right.
Um,
Barely uneven in some.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
I have something.
Yeah.
Is it possible you could expand this program to reach other students besides only the CLS students?
I don't see why not, yeah.
To get more.
Yeah,
Well, in the past, we've talked about collaborating with FSUS and reaching some of those freshmen that are
That's a
incoming.
great idea.
Mhm. Yeah, so,
I think we want to talk to Angela, but that's kind of like their direction.
yeah, exactly. We don't want to step on
Maybe-
toes either.
Another, along the same line, the transfer students get lost.
Oh, yeah.
Transfer students is a population that, yes, the support is here, but it's not always communicated clearly, so that might be another population.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
thank you. Oh, there's one more.
Oh, sorry.
One more point I wanted to make. So what this led to then is just an inconsistency in the client experience assignment application, right? So we had some students who connected with CLS students and they're going through this entire client experience. It's really robust and great. And then the other 12 or so students, you know, and Nicole and I are scrambling. Hey, I've got 5:30 students who don't have a partner. Do you have any 3:30 students that don't have a partner? Let's connect them. Okay, I have extra ones. I guess my 5:30 students are going to connect to each other. They all had the same requirements. They all had to complete, but it wasn't in a consistent manner.
We were
right?
scrambling in November to
Yeah,
make sure our students got the experience they needed to in the classroom. We did not want to send them out at the end of the semester not meeting those classroom objectives
Yep.
that we had planned for. And so we really had to scramble towards the end.
yes.
So as you can see, when it comes to objectives, right, the objectives for CLS and the objectives for us as instructors in these classrooms, we had to really, you know, sit down at the end of the semester and evaluate how did this go? And these are some of the things we learned. We learned in terms of timing that we have to use the data that we have available now. How many students engaged? Of those who engaged, why did they engage? How did they engage? And thankfully, Kaylee, if you know Kaylee, she's very good at keeping track of all of that. So thankfully, we have a little bit of data collected from that experience. We recognize timing wise, we really have to get those caseload assignments out a lot sooner. We got to get going sooner. We need to get the diversity training done that first week, second week of the semester. We can't wait. So our start date had to be much sooner, and we had to do a much better job of mapping out the semester in terms of when the expectations are of completing some of these experiences. You want to talk about classroom changes?
Yeah, so we also recognize that there were differences between undergrad 330 students versus master's level, right, 530 students. And we needed to draw on their strengths and find a better fit for them with regard to what they would do for CLS and outreach with Latinx students. We decided to shift classroom assignments. So instead of CLS and the client experience being kind of together, we separated them out entirely. So now students will have their CLS outreach as a piece of what they'll do, how to navigate and manage caseloads, how to do intakes, things like that. And then as a separate piece, they'll do a client experience.
A different assignment outside of CLS in the
Yes.
classroom, like we had originally done.
Yep.
before. So we kind of took that client experience out of the CLS plan and collaboration.
Yes. And then for BSW students, we added accountability for it.
Yeah, they,
So there are
points,
points.
points,
associated
students
with
want
it.
those points.
Yes.
So we made sure that there were points associated with that.
With the case note, like handing in the case notes. On a
And
weekly
proof,
basis.
and proof that they did that outreach weekly.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
So essentially what we learned was we needed to not start from scratch, but we spent a little bit of time in between semesters deciding how this was going to go. What we decided is that social work 330 students, again, that no client experience, but they would play more of an intake specialist role. So their title now in, spring 2022 is intake specialist. So they have a caseload of about 10 to 11. And their role is to do outreach every week, and there's points assigned to this, to CLS students to say, hey, how you doing? What can I help with? Hey, I'd love to meet with you and identify what your needs are. So if you need, I can assign you to a completion coach. So they weren't playing the role of completion coach anymore. Rather, we were doing that initial engagement, finding out and assessing what the students' needs are, and then making the appropriate referral to CLS. And so what that does for our undergrad students is it helps them learn how to manage a caseload and learn that some students aren't going to respond, just like some clients don't respond. Some students are going to be, quit emailing me, leave me alone, I don't need anything, I'm getting ready to graduate. Some students are going to say, oh my goodness, thank you for reaching out. And we are already seeing so much more engagement. My students in Traverse City this semester, I think each of them has done at least one intake where they've actually sat down with a CLS student, completed the intake, learned about the student, got to practice those interviewing skills, and then consider their case closed. After they do the intake, the case is closed and it gets passed on to a completion coach at CLS. So we're finding that already to be much more engaging. And then in terms of them getting that client experience where they're practicing ongoing documentation and treatment plans, we've made that a whole different classroom assignment. So that way they're still getting their objectives met for social work 330, but we're also being able to help out CLS. And then 530.
So for 530, they will stay with the role of CLS completion coach because that is something that they can navigate and engage with and meet the needs for. So in the fall, some of these 330 intakes will result in those students being placed on a caseload for a 530 student.
So we really recognized how to balance this a little bit better with the capabilities of our students based on where they are in our social work programs. And then therefore, how can they best help meet the needs of CLS and be able to continue this collaboration? What we expect is at the end of this semester, right, we're going to sit down again, we're going to say what worked, what didn't, what turbulence did we experience. But wow, what a difference a semester makes. We started a lot earlier. I mean, Kaylee was in our classroom week 2 doing diversity training and teams training. They had their caseload by the end of week 2, so they could start outreach on week 3. Most of my students have already completed an intake and they're still managing that caseload. It's week 8, and I'm already seeing such a much better experience for the students. And so in the fall, when we have another section of 530, we'll get to see how that works with 530 and make those appropriate changes. So this is our final attempt at any feedback. So I'm wondering what additional insight can you offer? Any other ideas? Application of skills for 530 versus 330. You've already given us some really great ideas.
Yeah.
I love that you're taking
Yeah.
notes, Erin, because we're going to obviously take these back to the table when we meet at the end of the semester and decide what we want to do in the fall. Any bits of feedback or comments?
Anyone online either?
And again, we wanted to kind of share this story because that's how it feels to us. We had this really cool idea in the
Yeah.
summertime that just, oh, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And then all that turbulence happened. We learned from it. We're doing it again and we learn from it. And I'm fairly open with my students. I'll say, okay, you're our second round of guinea pigs. And we also get that unofficial feedback from the students at the end of the semester. What worked, what didn't, what did this feel like for you? What do you think could be, what could change? And one thing that in getting that unofficial feedback we found is when they send an email to a CLS student with an emoji in the title, or they text with an emoji, they're getting a better response. So little things like emojis we're finding to get better responsiveness from CLS students. We're also finding that rather than giving a long email saying, hey, this is what's going on campus this week, I'd love to, identify what your needs are, how can I help? We're getting much better response this semester by just saying, hey, it's Nicole, how are you doing this week? Hope you're having a great week. Let me know if you need anything. We're really getting much more responses from text messages, emojis, and just short, sweet outreach. So we're finding that to be very effective.
It goes along with what we just listened to, and then
Yeah.
difficult students about this generation of
Yes.
students respond better to visual images than they do the other images. One question I did have, because it sounds like you guys are getting feedback from your students. Is Kaylee getting feedback from the CLS students that have been working with your students?
And
Yeah.
I wish she was here, and you know how
I know,
data driven she
right?
is, right?
Yeah.
So she has some really great data on the effectiveness of this collaboration.
And actually, Kaylee came to my classroom yesterday.
Oh,
So
good.
I had a section of 3:30 in Traverse City yesterday, and she virtually came into the class and said, it was kind of a check-in with my students. How's the semester going? What are your findings? And she shared some of her findings, which were much more positive than last semester, mentioning that rather than coming into the CLS office and saying, who's this person that's emailing me? They're like, oh, I'm meeting with my, I'm meeting with the intake person, and, I told them I needed this, and they gave me the phone number for my advisor, or whatever it is. So we're definitely getting a much better response rate. Okay.
There's two
Um,
comments here.
Yeah.
One that says, this is amazing, great job, and one that says, very helpful, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank all of you. I mean, like I said, we're really excited about the collaboration. And again, this process of identifying, how we can do better each semester and how this collaboration can grow. And just the diversity training alone, I mean, that our students are getting. We do spend a lot of time, obviously, in the social work department. Every class is infused with some level of, cultural competence and diversity training. But specifically, the level of training that our students are getting for the Latinx community and the needs of our students, and just from a cultural perspective, some of the different things that they, some of their needs. I mean, it's been really remarkable how many of my students are coming and saying, I never knew that, and now I'm seeing it in practice, right? I never thought of that, and now I'm seeing it in practice. And so it's certainly been, I think, a great experience for both sides.
Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. Thank you for all the feedback. Thank you online.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. Great feedback.
It was
I love it.
I really, the welcome week and then connecting face to face are
Yeah.
just, I didn't.
And free stuff. I think we forget about the power of giving college students free stuff.
Yes.
Yes.
Free food. And honestly, it kind of feels, it hits two needs at one time. They come to you.
Yeah.
And then it also gives opportunity
Yeah.
for those kids that might be struggling with food insecurities to come and get something.
And it does reduce, like when you can put a face to a name, it really does reduce another barrier of connecting with people,
I already noticed that.
Today?
Well, this week I started exercising for my students. And I have not had an opportunity to meet a lot of different things.
Nice job, ladies.
Thank
you so much.
Appreciate it. So, yeah.
Anything you need from me for